Shalom and welcome back to the Messiah Yeshua. We're so glad that you're here with us. Today we're diving into this new week's portion, which is called Miketz. We'll explore its wisdom, its beauty, and how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Genesis 41:1 through 44:17, which will take us to Zechariah 2:10 through 4:7, as well as John 10:22 through 28. Let's start with a summary of this reading. Pharaoh dreams of 7 fat cows swallowed up by 7 lean cows, and 7 healthy stalks of grain consumed by the 7 lean stalks. Pharaoh's counselors, the wise men, the magicians, are unable to interpret his troubling dreams. Joseph interprets the dreams to mean that the 7 years of famine will follow 7 years of plenty. He advises Pharaoh to lay up stores from the 7 years of abundance and plenty. Impressed with Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appoints him as second in command over all Egypt. Joseph marries and has 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. After the 7 years of plenty, the 7 years of famine begin just as Joseph predicted. The famine is severe in Canaan. Now Jacob sends his 10 older sons to Egypt to buy grain, but Benjamin stays home. When the 10 brothers arrive in Egypt, Joseph recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. To test their hearts, he accuses them of spying, arrests Simeon, and sends the others back to Canaan with the grain that they purchased. He warns them not to come again unless they have their younger brother Benjamin with them. The brothers are dismayed to discover the silver they paid for the grain has been returned to their sacks. Jacob is reluctant to send Benjamin. When pressed by famine, he finally consents. When Joseph sees that the brothers have returned with Benjamin, he receives them kindly, releases Simeon, and wines and dines the brothers. He gives Benjamin the best portion of the meal as he sends them away. He hides his own goblet in Benjamin's sack, framing him for robbery. Joseph demands that the brothers leave the robber as his slave and return to Canaan without him. The Parsha ends on the cliffhanger. Will the brothers abandon Benjamin as they did Joseph, or will they refuse? And let's go a little bit deeper. So the Miketz is the 10th reading from the book of Genesis, which is named Miketz, which means the end. The title comes from the first verse of the reading, which says, "Now it had happened at the end of the 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream," Genesis 41:1. The portion begins with Pharaoh's Parton's dreams, Joseph's interpretations, and his subsequent rise to power over Egypt. When a famine strikes the land of Canaan, his brothers come to Egypt seeking grain, but they don't recognize Joseph, who engineers a means by which he can test their character. This too is for the good. Now it happened at the end of the 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile, Genesis 41:1. Joseph's misfortunes began when he had 2 dreams about his brothers bowing down before him. Foolishly, he told them the dreams, inspiring them to act out against him. Thanks to those dreams, Joseph's life took a serious plunge. In this Torah's portion, Joseph's fortunes changed for the better, again as the result of the 2 dreams. 2 years after the release of the cupbearer from the prison, Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams that no one could interpret. The life of Joseph demonstrates God's sovereign hand in human lives. Though the world seems to follow a completely random course around us, God is working out his purposes in the midst of it. From Joseph's point of view, there was no reason to suspect that God had his best interest in the mind. Joseph had been kidnapped and betrayed by his brothers, sold into Egypt as a slave, falsely accused of attempted adultery, and imprisoned in a dungeon. His life seemed to be following Murphy's law of, if anything can go wrong, it will. So far, everything had gone wrong. As we observed in the previous Torah portion, Joseph stubbornly clung to an unshakable confidence in the God of his fathers. Although everything had tumbled down around him, he kept looking to God and believing that God was working through the chaos. He never fell into depression or despondency because he always believed that he was right where God had placed him. The late 1st century compendium of instructions to Gentile believers entitled the Didache says, Accept the things that happen to you as good, knowing that apart from God nothing comes to pass. Didach 3:10. Similarly, Paul says, we know that God causes all things to work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Now this can be compared to the story of a rabbi named Nahum, from the days of apostles. Everyone called him Nahum, this too, because no matter what happened, he would always say, this too is for the good. Amazingly, God honored his faith by continually providing miracles for Nahum. This is a very amazing story, and you guys are going to love this. So Nahum, this too, was serving as an ambassador to Rome. Once he was presenting the Roman emperor with a gift from the people of Judea, in an attempt to bribe him into reversing some anti-Jewish legislation. While en route to Rome with the chest, he stopped at an inn. While he slept, the innkeeper stole the precious treasures meant for the emperor from Nahum's chest and replaced them with sand. Nahum continued on to Rome, unaware that he was carrying a box of sand. When the emperor opened the chest and saw the sand, he ordered Nahum to be put to death. Nahum simply replied, this too is for the good. Just then, Elijah the prophet appeared in the guise of a Roman officer and suggested that perhaps the sand was magic sand. The emperor agreed to test the theory. When his troops hurled the sand at their enemies, they prevailed in battle. The emperor immediately released Nahum, reversed his decree against the Jews, and rewarded Nahum with great wealth. The story of Nahum, this too, is a good illustration of Joseph's story. Like Nahum, this too, Joseph refused to be pushed around by life's circumstances. Instead, he looked to God for strength and encouragement, and he kept on believing. In this Torah reading, we will see how Joseph's "this too is for the good" type of faith was rewarded and how his misfortunes changed. Strange dreams. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams. But there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh, Genesis 41:8. Pharaoh had two disturbing dreams. In the first one he saw 7 healthy fat cows rise up from the Nile and graze on the marsh grass. These were followed by 7 lean and scrawny cows that rose up from the Nile and devoured the 7 healthy cows. The second dream was much like the first. Pharaoh saw the 7 healthy stalks of grain swallowed up by the 7 withered stalks. Now the Bible says that Pharaoh called in the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, Genesis 41:8, to interpret the dream. The Hebrew word translated magician is derived from the root for engraver or writer. It refers to someone trained in occult knowledge. They were professionals with handbooks of dream interpretation at their disposal, but they could not interpret the dream. When Pharaoh cupbearer saw all of this, he was reminded of a strange dream he had 2 years ago. There had been a young Hebrew prisoner who interpreted the dream as well as the dream of a fellow prisoner. Both interpretations had proven true. The cupbearer remembered that he had promised the young man that he would mention him before the Pharaoh. Better late than never. The cupbearer suggested that Pharaoh bring the Hebrew prisoner and let him try to interpret the dream. Joseph was removed from the dungeon, shaved, dressed, and brought before the Pharaoh. When Pharaoh asked him if he could interpret the dreams, he replied, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Genesis 41:16. Pharaoh told him the dreams that Joseph explained, that the dreams were prophetic warnings. God has told to Pharaoh that what he is about to do, Genesis 41:25. Joseph said, "Now preparing for the lean years. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come." Genesis 41:29-30. Now Joseph explained to the Pharaoh that his dreams were warning from God. 7 years of abundance and plenty were about to begin in Egypt, but they were to be followed by 7 years of desperate famine. The solution was to lay up the stores during the 7 years of plenty, so that there would be sufficient food in the coming years of famine. Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph's wisdom that he had made him minister over Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Now Joseph oversaw the building of storehouses in which the abundant grain of Egypt's 7 years of plenty was stored. Life is uncertain, and it is only prudent to lay up savings and provisions. The proverbs say, "In the house of the wise are the stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has." Proverbs 21:20. Now, contrary to the advice of Joseph, modern society promotes a lifestyle of squandering all available wealth, overspending, and relying on credit. Though we live in the most affluent times that the human race has ever enjoyed, few people have the wisdom to lay up savings for the leaner times ahead. Yeshua told his disciples to lay up treasures in heaven instead of on earth. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For wherever your treasure is, there your heart will also be." Matthew 6:19-21. Our lives on earth can be compared to 7 years of plenty. We have an abundance of opportunities to do good to others, to repent and practice righteousness, and to give charity to the needy. However, these golden years of opportunity are limited. Whether in 7 days, 7 years, or 70 years, the opportunity to lay up treasures in heaven will vanish. After we die, our opportunities to do good deeds are gone. In Judaism, good deeds like giving charity to the needy is called a mitzvah. The plural form is mitzvot. The word mitzvah literally means commandment. Every time we obey a commandment that applies to us, it is a good deed. Therefore, the word mitzvah has come to be associated with any act of goodness. Our opportunities to do mitzvot are limited to our lifetime here on earth. Yeshua teaches that our mitzvot are like money placed into a savings account in heaven. When we pass on into the next life, we will be able to cash in on the mitzvot we have stored up in heaven. You have heard the saying, "You can't take it with you." This popular adage means that though a person might be very wealthy, he leaves it all behind when he dies. Yeshua teaches otherwise. He teaches that by giving your money to charity and investing your time and resources into the things of the kingdom of heaven, you can take it with you. You are storing it up in heaven. When you arrive in the next life, you will be rewarded for your acts of kindness and pity. Joseph encouraged all of Egypt to diligently lay up stores and provisions for the lean years to come. So too we should be storing up our resources in heaven for the years to come. Tokens of power. Now Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold necklace around his neck. Genesis 41:41-42. When Pharaoh placed Joseph in charge of Egypt, he gave him several tokens of his new office. He gave him his signet ring, he clothed him in fine linen, he gave him a golden necklace, and he had him ride in his own personal chariot. All of these items represent a transfer of power to Joseph. The ring contained the royal seal, enabling Joseph to sign documents in the king's name. The fine linen was of the best Egyptian quality. The same Hebrew word is also used for the linen used to make the tabernacle and the priestly garments. The gold chain was one of the highest honors the Pharaoh could bestow upon someone. The chariot was also a status of symbol. All of the above items were also mentioned in the Assyrian records of the 7th century BC. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal clad the Egyptian Necho in a multicolored garment, placed a signet ring on his hands, put a gold chain around his neck, and let him drive around in chariot. Joseph's rise to power and the tokens of his new office illustrate the exaltation of Messiah. Pharaoh bestowing his authority on Joseph can be compared to God bestowing his authority upon his son, Yeshua. Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. In addition to the tokens of his new office, Pharaoh also gave Joseph a bride. Her name was Asenath. She was the daughter of an Egyptian priest. Now legend reports that she was actually Dinah's daughter. So if you guys remember a story that we learned a few chapters before this, when Dinah was kidnapped and raped by Shechem, which was really unfortunate, what happened was she actually didn't want to leave that city when Simeon and Levi came to rescue her. She said, "Look, the whole world has seen what happened to me. What good am I there? Who's going to want me after? I'm not leaving." And then at that time, brave Simeon said, "I want you, and I will take you, and I will marry you, so please live with us." So he made her a promise to marry her, and he did marry her. And he had children with her. He also had a daughter with her, which was her first child, and Jacob adopted that daughter as his own, in a way, and she lived with them. And something happened that Jacob had to send his granddaughter away. So he sent her away, and she ended up in Egypt, and Potiphar's house has adopted her as their daughter. So now Joseph actually marries her, and she is Dinah's daughter. This is like very interesting how it all comes together. And she, Asenath, gave Joseph 2 sons. He named the first son Manasseh, which it sounds like the Hebrew word for forgetfulness. Joseph explained that God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Genesis 41:51. He named the second son Ephraim. Ephraim means double fruitful. Joseph explained, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Genesis 41:52. Did Joseph raise these boys as Egyptians or as Hebrews? Did he raise them as polytheists, or did he teach them to know God? One might suppose that Joseph would raise the boys as part of the Egyptian culture. After all, he was now an Egyptian aristocrat, moving in the most powerful circles of Egyptian power. Why give his sons some sort of complex by forcing them to stick out as different from the Egyptian friends? Many believing parents are reluctant to deny their children the experiences, entertainments, privileges, and social opportunities that other children enjoy, even though these things compromise believers' values. Children are adept at making their parents feel guilty for depriving them of such opportunities. Parents are afraid to overprotect their children. Joseph was not afraid to overprotect his sons from Egyptian culture. He knew that if he allowed his sons to assimilate into the culture, they would not be able to retain their faith in God or remain faithful to him. Now, Ephraim and Manasseh probably missed out on going to youth events with the Egyptian kids, and they probably did not get to hang around at the local temples or play on the athletic teams. As a result of these sacrifices, they grew and developed in spiritual character and became heads over 2 of the tribes of Israel. In fact, on Friday nights at Sabbath's table, fathers lay their hands upon the heads of their sons and bless them by saying, "May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." The brothers arrive in Egypt. Then the 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. Genesis 42:3. When the years of famine began, Jacob's family in Canaan began to run out of the supplies. Jacob had heard a report of grain for sale in Egypt, so he told his 10 oldest sons to make the journey and purchase supplies. He did not, however, send Joseph's brother Benjamin. Since losing Joseph, Benjamin was the only remaining son of his beloved wife, Rachel. When the brothers arrived in Egypt to purchase grain, Joseph recognized them at once, but they did not recognize him. The brothers bowed down before the man they assumed to be a dignitary over Egypt. At once Joseph remembered his dreams in which he had foreseen his brothers bowed before him. Could this be the fulfillment of those dreams? It was not. In the dreams there had been 11 brothers, but only 10 had come to Egypt. Joseph's brother Benjamin was not with them. He set to work on a plan to bring Benjamin, the 11th brother, to Egypt. He accused the brothers of spying and he contrived a strange test whereby they might exonerate themselves only if they returned to Egypt with their young brother. And this is very interesting. Why did he accuse them of spying? So the story goes that the brothers actually were really remorseful of what they have done to Joseph, and they, while their father sent them to Egypt to get food provisions, they also were trying to find Joseph there. So the way they entered Egypt, supposedly they entered by twos through 5 different gates. So 2 through one gate, 2 through the other gate, and that is why Joseph had kind of a good reason to call them spies. Why would you all not enter through one gate? Why did you have to split up and go through 5 different gates? And by this he said, you will be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Genesis 42:15. Just to make sure that they would do so, he imprisoned one of the brothers until the others returned with Benjamin. And it's really interesting that the brother that he imprisoned was the same brother that threw him down the pit when they were trying to sell him. So it's a very interesting parallel of what's happening in the story. And why was Joseph playing like this ruse? Was it the way of avenging himself on his brothers? Not at all. He wanted to test them to see if their hearts had changed. The only way he could engineer such a test was to have them bring Benjamin to Egypt. Had we been in Joseph's situation, we probably would have taken a different approach. The normal person who had suffered so much at the hands of his brothers would take advantage of the reversal. This was an opportunity for revenge. If Joseph had been a normal person governed by his passions and his bitterness, he might have had his brothers stripped and sold as slaves. Perhaps he would have felt the need to have a family confrontation. He might have hired a family counselor to moderate while he confronted his brothers with the injustices they had committed against him. He could have demanded apologies from them. I once knew of a situation very much like this in which a certain leader, in an effort to bring healing and reconciliation to families, was counseling his congregants to confront their parents and family about the shame and mistreatment they felt they had endured while growing up. Adult children who had been nursing bitterness for years went to their family members on missions on confrontation. Needless to say, the program did not result in family reconciliations. Instead, bewildered family members found themselves suddenly attacked for wrongs, real or imagined, committed decades ago. Many families were torn apart by this misguided approach to reconciliation. The path of godliness is the one of forgiveness and self-effacement. We are taught to love one another, and love does not seek its own. It's not provoked. It does not take into account a wrong suffered. And you can see that in 1 Corinthians 13:5. Joseph did not confront his brothers, nor did he sell them into slavery. He loved them, and because he loved them, he sought to find a way by which they might be reconciled. If only he could be certain that the brothers would not do to Benjamin what they had done to him. Joseph felt that he could let the matter drop and reveal his identity to them. But for the sake of Benjamin and his father Jacob, he had to be careful. He had to be sure that the brothers would not make the same mistake. Change of heart. Then they said to one another, "Truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us." Genesis 42:21. The Apostle Peter says this, "Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins." 1 Peter 4:8. Joseph loved his brothers. Despite the wrongs that they had done to him, he did not confront the brothers. He did not reveal his identity and condemn them for sinning against him. When we hold a grievance or grudge against someone because of some wrong that a person did to us, we eliminate the possibility that he will have a change of heart. If we make it known to the person that we are holding agreements against him and demand an apology, we rob him of the opportunity to mature, change, and perhaps apologize on his own initiative. Even if no apology is forthcoming, there is still the possibility that the person will have a change of heart. People do change. Believers should be changing, growing, and maturing constantly as we are continually transformed by the renewing of our mind. Romans 12:2. Joseph could already see the indications that his brothers had changed their hearts as they speculated about why they were being accused of spying. Since he was speaking to them through an interpreter, they did not know that he could understand Hebrew. The brothers thought that this trouble in Egypt had come upon them from God as punishment for their sin against Joseph. They remorsefully said to one another, "Truly, we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Now comes the reckoning for his blood." Genesis 42:21-22. When Joseph heard these words, his heart was filled with love and sorrow. He turned away from the brothers so they would not see him weep. As disciples of Yeshua, we can recognize the story of Joseph and his brothers on another level. It has many similarities to the story of Yeshua. Like Joseph, Yeshua was rejected by most of the Jewish people. Like Joseph, Yeshua ended up by and large with the Gentiles. Yeshua's brothers, the Jewish people, do not recognize him today. The weeping of Joseph tells us about the heart of the Master for his brothers, the Jewish people. Given in secret. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to restore every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey, and thus it was done for them. Genesis 42:25. It might seem that Joseph was nursing a grudge against his brothers when accused them of spying and sent them back to Canaan to get their brothers Benjamin. If that were the case, he would not have had their money placed back in their sacks. He showed his love for his brothers by bestowing secret charity on them. Prior to their departure, he instructed his servants to secretly return the money that each of the brothers had paid for the grain. The brothers left Egypt unaware that they were carrying their silver back home with them. The master says that when we give charity, it should be done Joseph style. And it says this, "But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." Matthew 6:3-4. Now Joseph wanted to give his brothers a charitable gift. He knew that the famine conditions in Canaan must be creating financial hardship. Rather than announce the charitable deed with a fanfare of trumpets, he secretly hid the money. He secretly had the money slipped into their bags. Now, Maimonides Rambam explains that there are different levels of giving charity, and this is a very important lesson to everybody who's listening. One of the lower levels is when the deed is known to both the giver and the receiver. A far higher level is secret charity. The person who gives secretly does so only for the sake of love. He knows that no one will be able to thank him. He will not earn any reward in the eyes of men. Now once there was a wealthy man who lived on the edge of the town. He was known to be stingy and miserly. Charity collectors who knocked on his door were gruffly turned away empty-handed. When there was a need in the community, the people would say, "Don't even bother trying that house. That miser who lives there never gives a dime." Even though he had no family or sons to inherit his wealth, he would not spend a penny more than he had to out of his savings. When the miser died, everyone expected that he had left behind a great deal of wealth. On examining his accounts, however, they surprised to learn that the man had secretly been supporting local charities and worthy causes all along. In fact, he had early exhausted his wealth with generous gifts to the poor, the needy, the orphans, the widows, and the teachers of the community. Many of the people of the town who had previously scorned the miser realized that he must have been the anonymous donor who had helped them many times in the past. Such a man's reward in heaven is great because the Father who sees what is done in secret will reward. Matthew 6:4. Now Joseph's brothers were abashed to find their silver back in their sacks. They thought that it would cause more trouble for them in Egypt. On their return trip, they brought the original silver plus more money for the additional grain they intended to buy. They told Joseph's steward how they had discovered the money in their sacks and now had come to return it. But the steward said, "Be at ease. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." When we perform charity in secret, we allow the glory and the credit to go to God where it belongs. And it's a very, very important lesson. Relinquishing the worries. Now their father Jacob said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And you would take Benjamin. All these things are against me." Genesis 42:36. The brothers told Jacob that they needed to take Benjamin to Egypt if they were to buy more grain and liberate Simeon. However, Jacob was unwilling to raise Benjamin. Joseph had engineered Benjamin's trip to Egypt in order to test his brothers' hearts. Ironically, it proved to be a test for Jacob's heart as well. "All these things are against me," he said, Genesis 42:36. Having already suffered the loss of both his wife Rachel and his son Joseph, Jacob could not imagine losing Benjamin. Jacob declared that without Benjamin his life would not be worth living. He would die of grief. Benjamin was non-negotiable. If we examine our own hearts, we will find that there are many things that we are unwilling to let go of. We all have certain things that are non-negotiable to us. They may be material things, such as jobs or possessions, or they may be relationships, or they may be loved ones. For parents, it is our children that we continually fret over. The walk of faith demands that we entrust even these non-negotiable things to God, and that we learn to rely on Him alone. Sometimes God will ask such things of us simply to teach us to trust Him better. Even if we lose this precious thing, regardless of what it might be, we will still have our Father in heaven. Ultimately, all things are in His hands. When we relinquish our non-negotiables to God, we experience the freedom, confidence, and joy that comes from really trusting in Him. We can live without the gnawing agony of fear and worry because we are no longer trying to retain control. Yeshua challenges us to give up worrying. He says, "And which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his lifespan? If then you cannot do even a very little thing, why do you worry about other matters?" Luke 12:25-26. Lacking nothing but prayer. May God Almighty grant you compassion in the sight of the man. Genesis 43:14. It's not easy to just quit worrying. Jacob was terribly worried about allowing Benjamin to go to Egypt, but in order to save the family from starvation, not to mention liberate Simeon, he had no other choice. When he at last committed to sending Benjamin to Egypt with other brothers, he had them pack double the amount of money so that they could return the money they had paid for grain on the last trip. He also sent them with presents for the Egyptian governor, a little balm and a little honey, aromatic, gum and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds, Genesis 43:11. Just as he had used gifts to win the favor of his brother Esau, Jacob hoped the gifts might soften the Egyptian governor's heart. According to Rashi, after Jacob had done all that he could by providing his sons with gifts to bring to Egypt, he said, "Now you lack nothing but prayer. I will pray for you." In the next of the Torah, he prays, "May God Almighty grant you compassion in the sight of the man, so that he will release to you your other brother and Benjamin." Genesis 43:14. When we have done all that we can do, we should do as Jacob did and convert our worries into prayers. The dream fulfilled. They bowed down in homage. Genesis 43:28. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, Joseph's servants warmly received them and brought them to dine with the governor. The 11 brothers all bowed down before Joseph. At last, the dream of the 11 sheaves bowing before Joseph's sheaf was fulfilled. Joseph questioned them about their father's health. When he saw Benjamin, he blessed him, and overcome with emotion, stole out of the room to privately weep. When he returned, Joseph seated the 11 brothers in order of their ages. The brothers were astounded. How did he know their birth order? Joseph lavished extra portions upon his brother Benjamin. He may have been trying to incite the older brother's jealousy in preparation for his final test of their hearts. The Torah says that Egyptians would not eat with Hebrews. This meant that the brothers could not eat with Joseph. They sat at one table, while Joseph sat alone at another. The Egyptians sat at a third table. The brothers must have wondered about this strange Egyptian's governor. Who was he? Joseph sharing a meal with his brother reminds us of Psalm 23. Which says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Psalm 23:5. This is ordinarily interpreted to mean that God prepares food for his chosen ones, but not for their enemies. However, the verse has an alternative interpretation. When the psalm says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies," it could be understood to mean, "You prepare a meal for me with my enemies." One does not eat a meal with his enemies unless he has to come to peace with them. The meaning of the psalm would then be that God makes peace with us and our enemies so that we can sit down and enjoy fellowship together. Joseph's brothers had proven themselves to be his enemies in the past. Now, through the amazing sovereign hand of God, they were seated at the same meal with Joseph. Joseph could have rightly said, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Psalm 23:5. The righteous man desires to live at peace with all men, even his enemies. Our goal should be to convert our enemies into friends. Then we will have no enemies at all. The silver cup test. Put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph had told him. Genesis 44:2. Joseph wined and dined the 11 brothers. In the morning he sent them on their way home with plenty of grain. Their money returned to them again, and the secret surprise in Benjamin's sack. Joseph told his servants to hide his silver cup in the Benjamin's sack before the brothers were even out of the city. Joseph's servant overtook them and accused them of stealing Joseph's silver cup. Naturally, the brothers denied it and invited the servant to search their belongings. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers tore their garments in distress. In the same way, their father Jacob had torn his garments in distress over Joseph's bloodied coat. On returning to Joseph's palace, the 11 brothers again prostrated themselves on the ground before him, just as he had foreseen in a dream. Still playing the role of a pagan Egyptian, Joseph said, "What is this deed that you have done? Do you not know that such a man as I can indeed practice divination?" Genesis 44:15. Joseph was not actually practicing divination. He knew that the brothers had his silver cup because he had ordered it planted in their belongings. The warning of divination was part of the ruse. Joseph offered to set all the brothers free except for Benjamin. They could return to their homes. All they needed to do was abandon their brother, much as they had sold Joseph so many years ago. The brothers did not see this as a test, but all of these strange circumstances had been orchestrated for this moment. How would they answer? Would they take Joseph's offer, or would they refuse to abandon their brother? Life is full of tests of character. Every day we are tested with hundreds of decisions, some small, some large. When these decisions involve a moral choice, they are tests. We are tested to see if we will think of ourselves first or place others ahead of ourselves. We are tested to see if we will be loyal to God and His Son. We are tested to see if we will repeat yesterday's mistakes, or if we have learned and changed. We are tested to see if we will return evil with evil, or if we will return it with good. Remembering that every situation we are being tested, just as Joseph tested his brothers, will help us to pass the daily tests of life. And that's about it. Thank you for watching. If this message has blessed you, please like the video and subscribe. It helps the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram linked in the comments for daily inspiration. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.